The call came at 4:47 a.m. Dispatch didn't explain much, just that I was to report to District HQ immediately. No time to shower, barely enough to throw on a uniform and fill a thermos. When I stepped outside, the frost was already eating the windshield of my truck, and the pines behind my cabin were black against the early gray. A thin layer of mist clung to the tree line like it was afraid to move. I'd been in the service of Colorado Wildlife Enforcement for 15 years. Long enough to know that when they wake you before dawn, it's not for paperwork. The precinct was too quiet when I arrived. Captain Mercer stood waiting in the briefing room, shoulders hunched beneath a flickering fluorescent light, a manila folder in one hand and a half-drunk mug in the other. He didn't offer greetings. "Sit," he said, voice dry as splintered wood. He slid the folder across the table like it might bite me. 5 faces stared back at me from the photographs, 4 men, 1 woman. All researchers. All employed by the Colorado Wildlife Institute. I recognized one. Dr. Elias Haynes, a vocal conservationist and expert in apex predator behavior. If he'd gone missing, something had gone very wrong. They were tracking a possible resurgence of Gullo luscus, Mercer said. Black-backed wolverine. Thought extinct in this region for decades. I raised an eyebrow. And someone thought Redspine was the place to look? Mercer gave a humorless smile. Apparently Haynes had trail cams pinging activity up there. Sparse hits. Claw patterns. Unusual scat. He convinced the Institute to authorize a deep woods survey. I flipped through the pages. Log entries. Supply manifests. GPS data. The last ping was dated 6 days ago. Then, nothing. "You're sending me in?" He nodded. "They want someone with experience. Someone who knows the forest, knows the terrain." My eyes settled on a red-marked zone on the map. Redspine. I'd heard the stories. Everyone in the service had. Locals didn't go near it. Old mining accidents. Landslides. Strange disappearances. Whole settlements gone without explanation. Forest that grew back wrong. There was a name the indigenous trappers used, something I couldn't pronounce, that translated roughly to the place where paths lie. It was wilderness in the truest sense. Untamed, unmapped, and if you believe the rumors, unwelcoming. "No one's been up there since the 80s, I muttered. "And no one's come back when they tried," Mercer said. "Which is why you won't be alone." I looked up. 4 contractors. Former military. Hired muscle. Their presence is a precaution. I didn't like the sound of that. They're not wildlife officers. They're not trackers. "They don't need to be," Mercer replied. "They're there to keep you alive. Your job is to find out what happened. Recover the researchers if they're alive. If they're not, get enough to write a report." I closed the folder. "And what if I don't come back either?" Mercer paused, then reached under the table. Set a thick case beside my chair and opened it. Inside was a satellite transponder, survival gear, a high-caliber sidearm. "We'll be listening," he said. "Up to a point." I met the contractors at the northern gate. 4 silhouettes under the dawn sky, leaning against a matte black transport rig. They didn't look like weekend hunters. They looked like men used to entering places people don't come back from. The biggest of them stepped forward. "Rogan," he said, offering a handshake that felt like gripping stone. "Team lead." The others followed. "Wells," said a lean man with eyes too alert for comfort. "Patterson," the third, heavy-set and slow-moving but radiating purpose. The last one didn't speak, just watched me with unsettling intensity. "That's Burke," Rogan added. "Don't take it personal." They wore no insignia. Their gear was unmarked. I caught glimpses of knives tucked into strange sheaths, customized rifles, packs that looked more military than backwoods. One of them, Wells, had a patch of cloth tied to his belt with tally marks scratched into it. "How much were you told?" I asked. "Not much," Rogan replied. "Scientists missing. You know the terrain. We know the rest." We drove north. Past where the roads narrowed and the signals died. Past ranger stations no longer staffed. Past crumbling signs warning of unstable ground and restricted zones. The pines grew denser, taller, their trunks dark as soot. The sun broke through only in scattered shafts, as if reluctant to touch the ground. No one spoke for hours. There was a weight on the air. Not just altitude, something deeper, older. Like the forest had drawn a breath and was holding it, waiting for us to cross some invisible line. When we stopped to refuel at a remote cabin post, Patterson muttered something under his breath. "This place smells wrong." "You mean the diesel?" I asked. "No," he said. "Smells like iron. Old blood and soil." It wasn't just metaphor. I'd caught the scent too, faint, sour, like rust and decay clinging to pine needles. Before we drove on, I stood outside the truck, watching the wind roll down the ridge. And I realized something strange. There were no birds. No insects. Not even the usual creak of branches. Just silence. And the forest still as stone, watching. By the time we left the last logging road behind, it was early afternoon. But beneath the canopy it might as well have been dusk. The trees rose thick and close, black-barked and heavy with tangled limbs that blocked out most of the light. The path, if you could call it that, was no more than a depression in the undergrowth, long since reclaimed by moss and rot. No signs. No markings. Just the shape of something once traveled, now half erased by time and silence. The air changed the moment we stepped past the first marker, an old rusted signpost, long since stripped of any lettering, standing crooked in the earth like a gravestone. The wind stopped. The sound stopped. The forest swallowed everything. No insects. No birds. Not even the soft, familiar crunch of pine needles underfoot. Each step landed as though muffled by some unseen presence, like we were walking on a dream or in one. Burke was the first to notice it. He stopped in mid-step, crouched low beside a fallen trunk. The others moved around him, silent, disciplined. I moved up next to him, rifle slung low, heart already ticking faster than I liked. He pointed without speaking. There, on the bark of the fallen tree, something burned into the wood. Not carved. Not etched. Burnt. As if the surface had been seared by focused heat, but no charring, no ash. The symbol was simple, a circle with 3 short slashes below it, like a mouth full of broken teeth. Trail marker. I asked, knowing it wasn't. Rogan studied it. Doesn't match any recon symbols I've ever seen. Wells snapped a photo with his personal cam. Not random, he muttered. Too precise. We moved on. And the further we went, the worse it got. The trees grew too close together. Their trunks warped at strange angles, some splitting near the base like something had grown through them. No birds nested in their limbs. No squirrels darted across the branches. The forest was lifeless. And still, it felt watched. Patterson stopped near a cluster of boulders and frowned. Look at this. Scorched into the stone, again not carved, burned, was another symbol. A spiral this time with a single eye-like slash in the center. What the hell does that? I asked. Plasma torch? Wells guessed but didn't sound convinced. But who the hell brings a torch out here to brand rocks? I moved closer, ran a gloved finger over the surface. It was hot. Not warm from the sun, hot like it had just been burned. But the surrounding stone was cold. We kept walking. At some point I stopped checking my GPS. It still worked, barely, but the terrain no longer matched the topography. Paths twisted in impossible ways. Slopes seemed to rise and fall with no regard to elevation charts. We'd crest a hill only to find ourselves staring at the same cluster of trees we'd passed an hour ago. I checked my compass. It spun slowly in place. No magnetic interference. No explanation. By late afternoon, everyone was sweating. Not from heat but from nerves. The silence had become a presence of its own, pressing into us, filling our ears. There was no ambient noise, just the rhythmic beat of our boots and the shallow, rapid breath of 5 men who no longer believed this was just wilderness. And then we found the third symbol. It was on a tree trunk facing the path. Burned deep and clean, but wrong. The wood around it had bubbled, warped, like it had been scorched from inside. The symbol itself was a vertical line crossed by 5 horizontal bars. Simple but somehow upsetting. Like a tally mark for things that shouldn't be counted. Patterson stepped closer. Smells like sulfur. He was right. The bark stank, burnt matchsticks and something chemical, almost like melted plastic. Wells shifted his weight. Anyone else getting a headache? Yeah, Burke muttered. Since we hit the last ridge. I realized I had one too. A pressure behind the eyes. Dull and rhythmic, like something trying to sync with my heartbeat. I looked at Rogan. He was watching the trees. Not the trail. Not the symbols. The trees. You see something? I asked. His jaw tightened. No. That's the problem. We made camp early. The clearing wasn't natural. It looked like something had torn a space open between the trees. Not cut, not felled. Just ripped. The soil was bare. No grass. No moss. Just cracked dirt and tangled roots that looked like they'd been clawing for something beneath. Don't like this spot, Patterson said, setting his pack down anyway. Better visibility, Rogan said. Less cover for anything to sneak up on us. We didn't make a fire. None of us said why. As darkness settled, the forest did not come alive. There were no nighttime noises. No crickets. No rustling. Just silence so thick it felt like pressure on the skull. The symbols were still out there. And something else. Watching. Waiting. It took us another hour of silent walking to reach the location marked on the Institute's last transmission. The coordinates pointed to a shelf of land near a narrow glade, just beyond a small stream that ran thin with melting snowmelt. As we crested the final ridge, I felt a shift in the air, subtle at first like walking through a mist that wasn't there. The headache that had been drumming behind my eyes all day pulsed once, hard, like something inside me had been tugged. Wells, who'd been scouting ahead, froze just beyond the treeline. His hand lifted, closed fist. Stop. We gathered behind him, silent, breath shallow. There, he said. The forest opened like a wound. Trees fell away to reveal a clearing where none should have existed, maybe 20 meters wide, the edges framed by blackened stumps and scorched soil. The air smelled wrong. Not just the scent of rot and mildew, but something sharper, acrid, chemical, like scorched hair and ozone. In the center of the clearing lay what remained of the research camp. It had been torn apart. Tents flattened, fabric shredded like confetti and tossed across the ground. Gear strewn everywhere, broken cameras, crushed storage crates, notebooks soaked and half buried in the mud. A portable satellite dish lay in two halves, its frame twisted like it had been wrenched apart by something strong and careless. Jesus, Rogan muttered. Patterson walked forward, slowly, scanning the edges of the clearing, rifle half raised. No drag marks, he said. Whatever happened, they didn't go quietly. Burke crouched near a collapsed tent, running a hand across the torn canvas. No animal did this. I stepped into the heart of the destruction, boots sinking slightly into the wet, churned earth. The camp had once been organized, rows of tents, a central cooking station, gear storage. Now it looked like a battlefield. Wells found the first blood. It stained the edge of a sleeping bag, dark and nearly black with age, soaked into the nylon like a warning. No body. No bones. Just the smear and a single shoe, small, likely female, lying beside it, still tied. Rogan picked up a crushed thermos, examined the dented metal. Some of this was done with force. Blunt, deliberate. He didn't say it, but I heard the implication. Not an accident. Not an animal. I circled to the far side of the clearing, where a waterproof crate had cracked open, its contents scattered in the mud. Papers, maps, and what looked like a journal, leather-bound, soaked but still mostly intact. I crouched and lifted it carefully. The binding groaned. Pages clung together with moisture, stained at the edges, but the ink had mostly held. The first page was an entry by Dr. Elias Haynes. Day 4. Minor camera disturbance last night. Nocturnal movement near Zone C. Unclear if local wildlife or atmospheric anomaly. Will investigate. I flipped ahead. Day 5. Symbols near the river. Carved. Burned. Pattern suggests intentional placement. Not natural erosion. No record in indigenous archives we brought. Another page. Day 6. Lights in the trees. Too high for drones. No sound. Faint pulses, irregular. Patterson says it's aurora, but we both know it isn't. My fingers were trembling. I flipped again and stopped. He waits. The words were scrawled across the page in thick strokes, almost angry. Below them, more lines over and over. He waits. He waits. He waits. Page after page. He waits. Each line more frantic than the last. Some scratched so deeply into the page that they tore through. One had been written in something darker than ink, something that had turned brown with age. I stood slowly, holding the book like it might start whispering. Rogan was beside me now, reading over my shoulder. "Who the hell is he?" he asked quietly. I didn't answer. None of us did. The sun dipped lower behind the trees, casting long shadows across the clearing. The wind shifted and carried with it a low sound, almost too low to notice. A creak? A groan? I turned slowly, scanning the trees. Nothing moved, but the forest was closer. The perimeter of trees that had once ringed the camp seemed to have crept inward, just a few steps. But it was enough to notice. Wells pointed to a tree near the eastern edge of the clearing. Another symbol. Burned deep into the bark. Not the same as the others. This one was a vertical slit with 3 branches curling outward like fingers. Burke exhaled slowly. That's not just a symbol. That's a face. And I saw it then, yes. A face if you twisted the image just right. A mouth screaming upward. Empty eyes. And the long curling lines were hands reaching. He waits, I whispered. Rogan turned sharply. "We're not staying here. Set a perimeter. We'll camp a half-mile north. This site's contaminated." We didn't argue. Each of us grabbed what we could from the wreckage: maps, gear, the journal. Not a trace of the researchers. No bodies. No footprints leaving the clearing. Just their camp. Just their blood. And their final message. He waits. The sun died behind the trees, and the forest closed around us. We made camp in a narrow depression half a mile north of the destroyed research site, beneath a canopy of black pines so thick it turned twilight into near darkness. No one said much as we pitched the tents. The silence between us was heavy, not just with exhaustion, but with dread. The journal's message echoed in all our minds, whether we admitted it or not. He waits. Burke set up perimeter tripwires while Wells assembled the thermal cams. Rogan kept watch, moving in a slow arc around the site, checking for movement. Patterson sat near the stove, staring at nothing, fingers twitching over the trigger guard of his rifle. The man hadn't said a word since we left the clearing. I tried to eat, but the food tasted like ash. The stew we heated smelled fine, but in my mouth it turned to something metallic and bitter. I forced it down anyway. Energy mattered now. We all needed to stay sharp. Darkness fell like a trapdoor slamming shut. No stars. No moon. The trees were too dense above, the air too still. Even our breath felt wrong, too loud, like we were shouting into the silence just by existing. Burke took first watch. Patterson and Wells bunked together in one tent. Rogan and I took the other. It wasn't trust, it was tactical. Eyes on the perimeter, staggered rest, weapons within arm's reach. I lay awake for what felt like hours, listening. Nothing. No insects. No breeze. Not even the creak of the trees. Just nothing. Until a sound. Faint. Something brushing against foliage. Soft, irregular. Then a second sound, closer. A low thump. Like something heavy shifting its weight just beyond the ring of thermal cams. I sat up slowly, holding my breath. Another thump. Then silence again. I glanced at Rogan. His eyes were already open in the dark. He held one finger to his lips. I nodded. The sound came again, closer now. A dragging. Something scraping lightly against bark. Metallic clicking. Burke's voice crackled in the radio. "Oh, urgent. Movement east side. Large. Not human. Thermal isn't registering." Click. Then static. I scrambled out of the tent, boots sinking into the mossy soil, rifle in hand. Rogan was right behind me. Burke's station was 30 feet east, just past the ridge. The thermal unit's green glow still blinked on the equipment stand, untouched. But Burke was gone. His rifle lay on the ground, barrel bent. His pack had been torn open. A smear of something dark ran along the earth, vanishing into the trees. Rogan swore under his breath. We checked the thermal cam, still active. No heat signature. Just static ripples, like the air itself had gone cold. I tried the radio. Burke, respond. "Do you copy?" Nothing. Then, click. A burst of static. And breathing. Raspy. What? Like lungs filled with liquid. Then a whisper. Not Burke's voice. "He waits." I dropped the radio like it burned. Rogan swept the tree-line with his rifle. Back to camp. Now. We ran. When we got back, Patterson and Wells were out of the tent, weapons raised. Their faces were pale, eyes too wide. "You hear it?" Wells asked. "Something moved around the camp," Patterson said, voice shaking. "We thought it was Burke." "It's not Burke." Rogan held up Burke's twisted rifle. Something rustled in the trees behind us. We all turned, weapons raised. But nothing came. Just that same dragging sound. Branches shifting, something heavy brushing past them without care. Then silence. The forest closed again. Patterson set up flares. We lit 3 around the perimeter. The light made us feel better. Safer. But not for long. Because the sounds didn't stop. All night we heard it, moving in circles. Always just outside the flare light. Sometimes fast. Sometimes slow. Sometimes it sounded like breathing. Sometimes like claws on bark. Never seen. Never clear. Once, Wells aimed his rifle and fired. A single round into the dark. The shot echoed and something laughed. Not loud. Not human. It was wet. Guttural. Giddy. It sounded like something choking on amusement. After that, no one fired again. We sat back to back near the stove, rifles raised, eyes twitching toward every shadow. Rogan didn't sleep. I didn't either. We just waited. Around 3 a.m., Patterson stood suddenly. "What the hell is that?" Then silence. We turned. But he was gone. Just gone. His rifle lay where he stood. A faint trail of blood led toward the trees. Rogan raised his gun and stepped forward, but I grabbed his arm. No. It wants us to follow. He looked at me, and for the first time since we arrived, I saw fear in his eyes. Real fear. Not tactical. Not manageable. Primal. We wait for dawn, he said, voice low. Wells nodded. It doesn't want us in daylight. We sat there, 3 of us now, staring into the dark. Listening to the thing that circled our camp. Always just out of reach. Always waiting. The sky bled from black to gray in thin, streaky veins. Morning clawing its way through the canopy. We hadn't slept. Not really. We drifted in and out of a kind of waking fever, nodding off for seconds, jerking awake to phantom sounds. Every rustle, every creak of the pines above felt like breath on our necks. Whatever circled our camp had vanished before the first light touched the treetops, but it left something behind. Wells found it first. We'd fanned out at dawn, moving in a cautious arc no farther than shouting distance from camp. It was Rogan's order, and none of us argued. We were down 2 men. If Burke had disappeared violently, Patterson had simply ceased. One moment present, the next replaced by a whisper and a smear in the dark. Wells' voice came through the radio, low and tight. North of camp. 40 meters. You need to see this. Rogan and I ran. We found Wells crouched at the edge of a dry stream bed, his rifle slung but forgotten, both hands limp at his sides. His face was pale, sweating. He didn't look up when we arrived. Instead he pointed. Patterson, or what was left of him, lay sprawled in the streambed's cracked bed. His body had been arranged, not dropped. Every limb posed with awful precision. Arms bent back and upward in sharp, unnatural angles, fingers spread and pointing skyward. His legs were splayed wide, ankles crossed, the toes bare and arched as if frozen mid-spasm. And his head. Oh God. His head was tilted at a perfect 90 degrees, eyes gouged out, tongue removed, but his mouth was stretched into a hideous grin, sewn open with pine needles. Dozens of them, each shoved through the flesh of his cheeks in a crude stitching pattern, black sap clotted around the punctures. The result was obscene. Like something trying to mimic joy. Blood pooled beneath his torso, but it had been used. Patterns had been drawn into the dried stream bed using his blood, sharp, spiral designs, geometric shapes that resembled the symbols from the journal. One in particular stood out, a circle with a single vertical slit surrounded by radiating lines. The I symbol, burned into bark, drawn in pages, now carved in blood. Rogan knelt beside the body, studying the pattern. It's deliberate, he muttered. This is message. I couldn't take my eyes off Patterson's face. That awful frozen smile. The glistening pine stitches. His jaw had been dislocated to make it stretch further. Why the hell do this? Wells whispered. Why stage it? Not staged, I said, voice dry. Displayed. Wells looked at me, eyes rimmed red. Displayed for what? I didn't answer. Because I knew. Somewhere deep in my bones, I knew. This wasn't a predator. This was ritual. Whatever had done this, it wasn't just hunting. It was communicating. We left the body untouched, marked the location on our maps, and returned to camp. No one spoke during the walk. The forest felt thick, pressing in around us. The silence had weight now, like the trees themselves were holding their breath. At camp, Rogan pulled out the journal again. He'd been keeping it in a waterproof pouch since we found it. His fingers moved through the pages with more urgency now. There. He pointed to a rough sketch. Same pattern. Same posture. It was drawn in shaky lines, arms raised, mouth wide, symbols spiraling outward from a prone figure. Page after the he waits sequence, he said. It's like a warning. No, I said. It's not a warning. It's a blueprint. Rogan stared at me. You think they followed this? I shook my head. I think they found it after. Just like us. Wells stood pacing. So what, this thing that took Patterson, posed him like this? To send a message? Rogan's jaw tightened. It's marking territory. Or worse, I added, it's making sure we know it's watching. There was silence then, long and terrible. The kind of silence that gnaws at you. Rogan finally spoke. We burned the body. No grave. No shrine. No place for it to come back to. We argued. Wells said Patterson deserved better. I said we couldn't be sure fire would help. Rogan didn't care. He lit the torch. We watched the flames eat the remains of our teammate. The smell was unbearable. Human fat, charred flesh, burnt sap and wet hair. It clung to our clothes, our lungs, our eyes. Wells gagged behind a tree. I stared into the fire until the face melted away and the stitched smile collapsed into itself. It took hours before we felt ready to speak again. We packed everything. Rogan made the call, heading toward the abandoned mining town. The trail would be hard, but we needed elevation, shelter, something with walls. Something older than tents and firelight. Steel and stone, he said. Something that remembers before this thing. But before we left, I walked to the tree line alone. I took my knife and carved a single phrase into the bark. Don't smile back. Then I turned and followed the others, into deeper forest toward darker places. The blood hadn't just marked a body. It had marked the beginning. We reached the edge of Redspine just before nightfall. The forest hadn't released us so much as spat us out. After hours of pushing through tangled underbrush and breathing silence so thick it felt like we were walking through a grave, the trees simply ended. And there it was, a forgotten scar in the mountain's flesh. Redspine. Once a mining settlement, now a skeletal ruin. The cabins sagged inward, their roofs collapsed like broken ribs. Rusted rails stretched from the collapsed mouth of the mine like arteries turned black. A crooked water tower leaned over the clearing, its surface covered in patches of dark moss and something else. Scratches. Deep ones. Not random. Not weather-worn. Made with purpose. We stood at the tree line staring. Doesn't feel abandoned, Wells said softly. He was right. The town wasn't silent the way ruins are silent. It was listening. Watching. Rogan took point, rifle in hand. Stay sharp. We're not here for sightseeing. We entered cautiously, boots crunching on gravel and fragments of old bone. Windows in the ruined shacks gaped like eye sockets. Every creak of wood sounded like breath held too long. Inside the main building, likely the foreman's office, the air was thick with mildew and something older. Sour. Metallic. I found a desk half collapsed under the weight of rotted ledgers and warped maps. In one drawer, I pulled out a small leather-bound book fused with blood. Still tacky. On the wall, someone had scrawled in rust-brown streaks. Don't dig. Don't look. Don't stay. Wells backed away. This place is cursed, he muttered. Rogan ignored him. We need to find where they went. The expedition didn't vanish into thin air. That was when he found the trapdoor. Hidden beneath a crumbling rug in the corner, it opened with a groan that echoed like a dying breath. Stale air billowed up from the black below, dry but with an undertone of rot. The shaft, Rogan said. We stared down into the hole. Steel stairs spiraled into the dark. Cold metal, slick with condensation. The air coming up was wrong, too still, too heavy. I'm not going down there, Wells whispered. Then stay here, Rogan answered. And descended. I hesitated only a second. Then followed. Wells cursed under his breath, but he came to. The descent was like falling slowly into the earth's throat. The walls grew tighter, the air more ancient. We passed layers of stone scarred by pickaxes long since rusted away, and then the carvings began. At first I thought they were miners' etchings, old dates, names, crude drawings. But they kept repeating, spiral after spiral, handprints with too many fingers, slashed eyes, open mouths. They weren't carved with tools. They were burned in, the stone blackened, cracked at the edges. Fresh. What the hell is this? Wells breathed, his voice barely a sound. Not miners, I said. Not any miners I've ever known. We moved deeper. The mine twisted, wrong angles, uneven floors. Our lights flickered. Batteries full, but something interfered. At a curve in the tunnel, the smell hit us, scorched rock and meat. The room ahead opened like a wound in the earth. Bones. Dozens of them. Human. Animal. Arranged in patterns, circles, spirals, pyramids. Some fused together like they'd melted into one another. Symbols carved into skulls. Teeth arranged in grids on the floor. Femurs marked with unreadable runes. Wells dry heaved. Rogan didn't move. It's a shrine, he said. Or a warning. We should have turned back. But we didn't. Further in, the tunnel narrowed, forcing us to move single file. The walls began to pulse with heat. Not actual warmth, but something felt on the skin like invisible breath. At the end, we found a wooden door bolted into solid stone. Words were seared into the rock above it. You looked. You spoke. You entered. He waits below. The letters shimmered with a charred glow, as if the stone still remembered the fire. Nope, Wells said. We go through there, we die. He was shaking. So was I. But it was too late. From beyond the door, something breathed. Long, slow. A wind that didn't move air but still reached us, carrying with it the scent of ash, rot, and something waiting. Rogan raised his flashlight and stared at the door. Then he smiled, not with joy, but the grim satisfaction of a man who had finally found the thing he should have never searched for. "We found it," he said. And the breathing continued. We didn't sleep. The breathing behind the bolted door continued, long drawn-out exhales that seemed to rise through the stone and settle in our bones. No wind moved, no water dripped, yet the air around us shifted like something massive was turning in the dark just beyond the reach of our light. We set up camp in the central chamber of the mine, near the tunnel split, beneath the ruined support beams and the ceiling that looked ready to collapse. None of us sat. We crouched or stood, weapons in hand, staring into the black where the flashlights failed. "You feel it?" Wells whispered around midnight. I nodded. My heart hadn't stopped hammering for hours. "Like something's walking," he said. "Heavy. Measured. Footsteps." We'd all heard them. In the tunnel behind us. Then above. Then below. And they were getting closer. Price volunteered to stand first watch. He was the quiet one of the group, stocky, serious, always checking his gear. The kind of man who didn't scare easy. But even he flinched when a soft sound, like dragging fingers across stone, echoed down from the ceiling. I tried to sleep. Curled in my bag, rifle beside me, one eye open. I managed maybe 20 minutes before the screaming started. It wasn't a long scream. Just one sharp, sudden blast of agony, a human voice torn in half. Then silence. We jumped to our feet. "Price." Rogan hissed. No answer. We spun our lights in every direction. Nothing but broken walls and collapsed supports. "Fan out," Rogan barked. "Stay sharp." We moved, spreading into the offshoot tunnels. The air was thicker now, heavier, like breathing through soaked cloth. Every step seemed to echo twice. Once from our boots. Once from something behind us. Wells shouted first. "In here." We followed the voice to a narrow corridor. At its end, a room we hadn't seen before. A side chamber half caved in, full of discarded mining equipment and twisted rebar. Price was there. Or what was left of him. He hung from the ceiling by rusted chains driven through his shoulders and thighs. His body was contorted backward, spine arched so far it looked broken. His mouth had been pried open and inside was stone. A jagged chunk jammed down his throat, splitting his jaw. Worse, his eyes were gone. Clean sockets stared at us, weeping blood. On the floor beneath him, carved into the rock in fresh gouges. He is nearer now. Wells backed out of the room and vomited. Rogan didn't say a word. He just raised his weapon and scanned the corners. We should have left then. But fear does strange things. It paralyzes. It convinces you that retreat is death too, that all you can do is press forward. So we did. We returned to the central shaft and decided to keep moving. Not back up. Deeper in. The door, the one with the burned words above it, had been opened. No one had touched it. No one had heard it open. Just hung ajar. The tunnel beyond was different. The stone was smoother, like something had worn it down over centuries, not by tools or water but by movement. Endless, repeated movement. As if something massive had paced there for longer than man had existed. We entered. The air temperature dropped 10 degrees. Our lights flickered. The breathing resumed, not from behind this time but ahead. Wells was shaking now. I could see his rifle barrel quivering. We moved through the darkness for what felt like hours. Time lost meaning. My watch stopped ticking. Rogan's compass spun without settling. Then we reached the second chamber. It was enormous. A domed cavern easily 3 stories high, carved entirely by unnatural hands. The walls pulsed with symbols, not carved, not painted, but glowing softly beneath the surface, like veins filled with smoldering coals. And in the center, a stone altar. Beside it, slumped against the wall, was Langley, our third. At first we thought he was dead. His eyes were wide, mouth slack, body unmoving. Wells rushed to him. Big mistake. The moment he touched Langley's shoulder, Langley snapped upright and screamed. A long, raw, animal scream, not of pain but terror. "He sees me," Langley cried. "He's in my head. He's in the rock. He's in the goddamn light." Then he seized. His body convulsed violently. Blood ran from his ears. From his eyes. Then, like a puppet with its strings cut, he slumped forward, jaw twitching, neck twisted at an angle no human neck should turn. Wells backed away, stumbling. "This is wrong. This is all wrong." And then we heard it. Footsteps. Heavy. Slow. Deliberate. Coming from the tunnel behind us. The one we just used. Rogan raised his weapon. "Back. Get back into the cavern." We ran. The sound followed, but never fast. never rushed. As if it didn't need to hurry. It knew the layout. It knew the dark. It knew us. We barricaded the entrance to the chamber with whatever we could find, broken rock, metal scaffolding, and old mine cart. It wouldn't stop it, but it gave us seconds. Wells knelt beside Langley's body, whispering something I couldn't hear. I stared at the glowing walls. Symbols shifted under my gaze. They weren't static. They were moving, breathing, watching. And then the sound stopped. No footsteps. No breathing. Silence. Until the whisper. So soft. So low I wasn't sure I heard it aloud. Look. Wells turned his head. I screamed at him not to. But it was too late. His body seized just like Langley's. His back arched, limbs snapped. Blood burst from his nose, his mouth, his eyes. Then silence. He was dead. And we were too. Me. Rogan. And the thing in the dark. The mine felt different now. It wasn't just darker. It was denser, like the air itself had grown thick with something old and hostile. The damp, metallic scent had deepened into a coppery stench that clung to the throat. Every breath was labor. Jason and Rogan moved without speaking, lit only by Jason's flickering headlamp. They hadn't found Mason's body. Just the scream. Just the blood. Just the drag marks into the stone. The silence between them was not merely the result of grief. It was fear. Primal and cold. The kind of fear that doesn't make you run. It roots you, gnaws at your spine, makes you afraid to even speak. Jason stopped first. On the wall to his left was a symbol he'd seen before. Burned into the stone. 3 jagged vertical lines slashed through a circle. He touched it, then recoiled. It was warm. Don't, Rogan whispered hoarsely behind him. Just, don't touch it. Not anymore. Jason turned. You saw it too. Rogan nodded slowly. Back in the first chamber. On the ceiling. Then again carved into Mason's chest. They were surrounded by them now, etched symbols, some freshly burned, some faded by time and erosion. All watching them. They moved deeper and the walls began to shift. What had once been raw, jagged rock now appeared, shaped. Smooth. Carved. Stone murals. Warnings in a language they couldn't read. Bones arranged into patterns. And those 3 slashes through the circle. Again and again. Jason raised his flashlight and froze. A new set of markings. Different from the rest. Simple lines like a primitive message scratched in haste. Don't look. Don't speak. Don't pass. Jason reached for his notebook. The same rules had been scribbled in the final pages of Dr. Halberd's journal. They hadn't paid attention. Not really. They thought it was paranoia. Now it felt like prophecy. What if we already broke them? Rogan asked. Jason didn't answer. Because they had. They had looked into the hollow glow of those burning eyes back in the clearing. They had spoken about it, described it aloud, tried to classify it. And they had passed. Past the marked rocks. Past the altar. Past the bones shaped into warnings. A low gust of wind hissed through the corridor behind them. Only there was no wind in the mine. Rogan swung around, rifle raised. Jason watched his hands shake. Something breathed at them from the dark. It didn't sound like a living thing. It sounded like the mine exhaling. And then Jason realized it. The symbols, he whispered. They're not warnings. Rogan looked at him. They're rules. Binding rules. We're in its territory. Its temple. He stopped, something catching in his throat. Not fear. Memory. Dr. Halberd's last note. It doesn't kill unless the rules are broken. But we always break them. Jason backed away from the wall and felt something crunch under his boot. He looked down. A skull. Cracked clean in half. Rogan lowered his rifle. I think I saw it, he whispered. Jason went still. Back there. When I turned after Mason disappeared. Just a glimpse. Tall. Thin. Skin stretched tight like it was sewn over bones. Eyes? His voice caught. God, the eyes. You looked? Jason asked, voice barely audible. I didn't mean to. They both stood in the middle of the tunnel, surrounded by fading light, chiseled walls, and an absence of hope. Then the breathing came again. Closer. This time Jason saw the faintest shimmer ahead, like heat rising from asphalt. And in that distortion, a pair of glowing, pulsing embers. No, Rogan muttered, stepping back. No, no. Jason clamped a hand over Rogan's mouth just as his scream rose. The thing didn't step into the light. It didn't need to. It was part of the dark. Born from it. The air thickened again. The lights dimmed further. And then, movement. Not footsteps. Just the sickening awareness that the thing had moved. From there, to here. Jason closed his eyes, but he could still feel it. Still sense it. The rules made sense now. Looking was the invitation. Naming was the sacrifice. Crossing into its place was the death sentence. They had done all three. The whisper came not from the air but inside their skulls. You saw. You spoke. You came. Now you stay. Jason opened his eyes just as Rogan turned to run. No. But it was too late. Rogan's boot struck one of the skulls, slipped, and his head hit the stone floor with a sickening crack. Jason lunged to help him but stopped halfway. Rogan wasn't moving. Blood pooled beneath his head, soaking the symbols. Jason lifted his eyes and met the creatures for just a second too long. He fell backward, heart pounding, head spinning. A cold pressure entered his mind, a presence pushing inside. Not thoughts. Memories. Visions. Dozens of explorers, soldiers, miners, lives consumed in this place. Shown to him in flashes, in screams, in bones ripped apart and reassembled into warnings. Warnings no one ever understood until it was too late. He blacked out. When Jason woke, he was alone. The mine was silent. The creature gone. But the air still carried its rot. He crawled to Rogan. Cold. Gone. Jason sat in the dark, flashlight flickering, surrounded by rules carved into stone and written in blood. He had one last job to do. He opened his journal, pulled out a knife, and began scratching the message again and again across the walls, across the floor, in chalk, in ink, in blood. Don't look. Don't speak. Don't pass. Because someone else would come. And he had to try. The third night fell like a guillotine. Jason sat alone beside the broken remnants of their last camp. The underground wind had died. The silence that replaced it wasn't peace, it was a void. Rogan's body lay shrouded beneath Jason's jacket, his face covered with a torn cloth. He hadn't moved him far. There was no point. Jason had barricaded himself in a side shaft, lighting a flare every few hours just to keep the darkness from swallowing him whole. But the shadows always crept closer when the flare burned out. And that thing, the Keeper, it never really left. He could feel it watching. Always just outside the circle of light. He whispered the rules to himself again and again, a mantra carved into his mind now. Don't look. Don't speak. Don't pass. They had done all three. They were the reasons it had come. And Jason had nothing left. Until he heard the voice. It was faint, echoing from somewhere far down the shaft. Hello? Is someone there? Jason froze. No, it had to be a trick. A hallucination. But then it came again. Help. Anyone. This time closer. Not a hallucination. Not the thing mimicking speech. This voice was too panicked. Too human. Jason grabbed his flare, lit it, and pushed himself to his feet with a groan. His ribs ached. His hands were raw from carving warnings. His skin reeked of sweat and copper and dirt. He followed the voice. It led him through tunnels he hadn't dared enter before. Ones untouched by their group, filled with signs he couldn't read and markings that pulsed faintly as he passed. He avoided eye contact with the walls. Avoided thinking too hard about how the shadows moved when he wasn't looking at them. The voice came again, now terrified. Jesus, someone. Please. Jason rounded a corner and found the source. A man, early 30s, caked in dust and ash, was trying to climb out of a collapsed tunnel. His backpack was torn, and he held a cracked GPS unit in one trembling hand. Jason raised the flare. The man shielded his eyes. Oh my God. You're real. I thought I was losing it. Who are you? Jason croaked, voice barely human anymore. Eli Ramos. I'm a field geologist. I was sent to check seismic activity around Redspine. Just basic mapping. My radio died. Then I found an old tunnel, thought I could shortcut through. Jason grabbed him by the arm. You need to leave. Now. Wait, who? Shut up. Jason pulled him closer, face wild in the flare light. We don't speak down here. Don't say its name. Don't ask. Don't look. What the hell is going on? Jason didn't answer. He dragged Eli back the way he'd come. Behind them, something moaned deep in the mine. A sound like air escaping from lungs that hadn't breathed in centuries. Jason didn't look back. He just ran. The tunnel shook. Pebbles rained from the ceiling. The flare in Jason's hand flickered as cold wind blew from behind, stronger with every step. Keep your head down. Jason shouted over the roar. Eli stumbled behind him, gasping, confused, but too terrified to disobey. The walls narrowed. Symbols blurred past. Some of them glowed, some bled. Jason shoved through webs that hadn't existed moments before. The mine had changed, reshaped itself. It didn't want them to leave. They reached the last junction before the surface tunnels. And that's when Jason heard the footsteps. Not boots. Not claws. Bone. A wet, brittle clatter echoing behind them, growing louder, faster. Jason turned and saw the flare light bend, curve, like it was being pulled into something. Then just beyond the light he saw the eyes. Not glowing this time. Just reflecting. Yellow. Tall. Jason stepped between Eli and the dark. "Run," he said. "Now." "What?" Jason shoved him. "Go." Eli ran. Jason stayed. The keeper didn't move. Not yet. Jason stared at it without really seeing. The rule was broken long ago. Now he had nothing left to lose. "I'm the one who called it," Jason whispered. "Not him. Not them. Me." The thing didn't blink. Jason lifted the flare like a ward. "Take me." And the keeper moved. Not fast. Not angry. Deliberate. It stepped into the light. Jason saw its full form now. Bones twisted like tree roots, skin tight and gray with frost, limbs too long, spine like a centipede's. Its mouth was just a hole rimmed with jagged teeth. No lips, no tongue, just hunger. No soul. It reached toward him. And Jason threw the flare. Right into its chest. The thing recoiled with a soundless scream, fire searing through its body. It wasn't pain, it was disruption. Something pure interrupting something foul. Jason turned and ran. He found Eli just ahead, half collapsed near the surface ladder. Jason shoved him upward. "Climb." "But what about?" "Go." Eli climbed. Jason followed, slower. A sharp pain pierced his side. He looked down. Blood. A deep gash along his ribs. The keeper had touched him. Jason reached the surface seconds after Eli. Moonlight hit his face like salvation. He collapsed onto his back, chest heaving. Eli was yelling into a satellite phone. Jason barely heard it. His vision blurred. The stars overhead were spinning. "You're okay," Eli said, dropping beside him. "They're sending a chopper. Just hang on." Jason looked at him, smiled weakly. "Tell them not to come back." Eli blinked. "What?" "Tell them." Jason grabbed Eli's wrist, bloody fingers tightening. "Don't look. Don't speak. Don't pass. Burn that into the signs. Make it big. Make them listen." Eli nodded. "I will. I promise." Jason's grip loosened. His chest stopped rising. And as Eli knelt beside him under the stars, the wind from the mine whispered through the trees. "It still watches." Jason Carter knew he was dying. Not in the abstract way people sometimes feel during dangerous moments. No, this was physical. Real. The cold had crept inside his chest like a second set of lungs. Something had broken in him. Something that couldn't be fixed. Every breath rattled. Every heartbeat felt like it had to fight gravity. He stumbled against the tunnel wall, smearing his blood across ancient stone. Each step was a war. But he kept moving. Not because he thought he'd survive. Because someone else might. The tunnel behind him was no longer empty. He could hear it, slow, measured steps, wet breath echoing down the stone. And worse, he could feel its presence. The thing hadn't chased him when he'd pulled Eli to safety. It had watched, studied. And when it struck, it didn't maul or tear, it marked him. The wound wasn't meant to kill immediately. It was ceremonial. A sentence written in flesh. Jason's flashlight flickered, then died. He kept going. Hand on the wall. Blood trailing behind. He reached a wooden support beam and drew his knife. The blade shook in his grip. He carved into the timber, pressing harder to keep the line straight. "Don't go." The blood from his palms smeared into the grooves. As he turned to keep moving, a low sound rose from the darkness behind him. Not speech. Not an animal. A voice without form or throat. Something ancient trying to remember how humans talked. Jason didn't turn around. He pressed forward. He carved more words into a split rock ahead, slashing with the knife even as it tore open his own skin from the recoil. "Don't look." The light outside was getting closer. Maybe 50 feet. Maybe less. But every step cost more. His body was crumbling from the inside. Behind him, the breathing was louder. The air was colder. He reached a tree root jutting through the cave wall like an exposed artery. He leaned against it, shaking, and whispered the final warning aloud, more to himself than anyone else. "Don't speak." And then he carved it, deep, jagged lines. "Don't speak." His knife dropped. So did he. When Eli found him, Jason was lying just outside the mouth of the tunnel, half in shadow, half in dying daylight. His eyes were open, blazed. His chest barely rose. "Jason," Eli said, falling to his knees beside him. Jason's bloodied hand reached up weakly. He didn't speak. just pointed at the rock wall next to them. There, in his own blood and carved with a dying man's hands, were the 3 messages. Don't go. Don't look. Don't speak. Eli nodded, choking back tears. I won't. I swear. I'll remember. I'll tell them. Jason's eyes locked on him one last time. Then he exhaled. And didn't breathe again. The rescue team never found the creature. They never found the others either, only ruins, ash, and echoes. The government sealed off the Redspine region, citing unstable ground and environmental hazards. Mining rights were revoked. Public access was denied. Maps were scrubbed. Roads rerouted. But the signs remained, carved into stone, burned into trees. Jason had made sure they would. He had turned his last moments into warnings. Warnings for those who would come after. Years later, hikers found the entrance again. 3 young men with cameras and too much confidence. They ignored the weathered signs and the stories passed down in whispers. They joked about legends. They laughed at the blood-stained carvings in the rock. One of them said, "Hey, who the hell is JC?" None of them came back. Somewhere beneath the mountains, where the light doesn't reach and the air tastes like dust and old bones, something still waits. It doesn't sleep. It doesn't die. It remembers Jason Carter. And the mistake he made by stepping into forbidden places. But it also remembers the man who tried to stop others from making the same mistake. His body is gone. But his signs remain. He was here. And now you are